Remembering Lot's Wife is the title of my message today. And our reference is Genesis chapter 19 from verse 1 to 26. Well, the first thing I'd like us to remember about Lot's wife is that she was privileged. The most important privilege that Lot's wife had was probably that of being married to a man who had knowledge of the true living God. You know, that is because during her time, very few families on earth had any relationship with the living true God. It would be right to assume that because of her privilege of being married into a family that knew God, you know, Lot's wife was well acquainted with the God that Lot and Abraham worshipped and served. So privileged was she that she even witnessed, God deliver her family, when they were under attack from a group of some local kings. In Genesis chapter 19, verse 1 to 3, Lot's wife had the privilege of hosting, the angels of the Lord in her own house. And because of her privileged position, I believe that Lot's wife had every opportunity not to perish. But the sad reality is that she indeed ended up perishing. And what we learn from this is that it is possible to be in a very privileged position and yet get lost. I believe a good number of us have had the privilege of being born in a lovely Christian family and having, rich Christian heritage. Some of us had the privilege of being prayed for even before being born, so to speak. A good number of us had the privilege of being prayed for and dedicated to the Lord, even as young little children. A good number of us had the privilege, of attending Sunday school. And a good number of us grown-ups have had the privilege of listening to God's word as it is faithfully preached, from our pulpits. We have been privileged in many ways, just the way Lot's wife was privileged. And yet, the sad reality is that we may end up perishing in spite of the privileges. And I put it to us that it is not sufficient to be privileged or even be closer to grace. You can come from a deeply religious background. You can have many spiritual privileges, but without faith in Jesus, you can end up being lost. Well, the second thing I'd like us to remember about Lot's wife is that she was prepared. Though on short notice, the angels prepared Lot and his family about their intention to destroy Sodom. Genesis chapter 19, verse 12 to 13 says, the two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry of the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. And Lot's wife must have heard the powerful words of the angels who went to Sodom, and prepared her and her family to leave. But the sad reality is that though she was prepared and even led out of Sodom. She unfortunately did not make it to safety. And dear ones, I believe that just like in the case of Lot's wife, God is continually preparing us for the coming eternity. And the Bible is full of solemn warnings that are meant to prepare us. And the question is, will you respond in obedience to God's preparation? I beseech you, by the mercies of God, be diligent in heeding to God's preparation. Be diligent in obeying God. Be diligent in honoring God. Be diligent in taking God at His word, realizing that you are not here permanently. Heed God's preparation to you, I beseech you. Well, Lot's wife was privileged. Lot's wife was prepared. But there's something else I'd like us to remember about her. And that is the fact that she sadly perished. You know, God's message about the impending judgment was so clear. It was clear to Lot and the rest of the family. Look at Genesis chapter 19 and verse 17. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back." God's instructions: flee for your lives. Don't look back. And don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Hey friends, a clearer message could not have been given. But did Lot's wife heed God's warning? Did she heed God's preparation? Certainly not. Certainly not. Genesis chapter 19 verse 26 is one of the saddest portions in the Holy Bible. And this is how it reads. But Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Oh, how sad. And you may be thinking, what an insignificant action. What a little sin to be visited with such harsh punishment. That was so insignificant. Why should she become a pillar of salt? Wasn't that not a major sin? Well, as insignificant as looking back may sound, I want you to realize that looking back was a sign of unbelief. Looking back was a sign of disobedience. Looking back was a sign that Lot's wife had deep attachment to Sodom. And friends, the fact that Lot's wife perishes should remind us that it is possible for one to perish even when they come from privileged backgrounds, and even when they have been prepared about the impending judgment. It is possible to still perish. And my challenge to you today is, let us learn from the example of Lot's wife. Let us be obedient to God. Let us follow God's instructions, even as we remember Lot's wife.